and expanding people's opportunity to vote. And we're not just talking about people who were not already eligible to vote. We're talking about making it possible for eligible voters to vote in elections. And going to 24-hour voting for eligible voting just makes it accessible for working men and women who are getting off work at 10 o'clock, midnight, 2 o'clock in the morning. You tell me what's wrong with that when we are talking about eligible voters. Allowing people, for example, to go through drive-through. What's wrong with that for eligible voters? I can drive through and get a Whataburger, Burger King, Jack in the Box, any time of the day, 24/7. You mean it's easier to go and pick up something to eat than it is to be able to exercise your fundamental right? There's nothing wrong with that. And there was nothing in the law that said you could not. Bills that restrict the number of voting locations, the number of voting machines in a location, primarily in communities of color, where the lines become longer. Now, there's a whole lot wrong with that. Allowing people to be inside a voting area and video record people while they are voting, you tell me that that's not intimidating. Especially for people of color who have had to fight for the right to vote. When people have had to identify, for example, how many bubbles in a bar of soap. This is just no more than a new brand of Jim Crow 2.0. And anybody who does not stand up and say no, quite frankly, you become a part of the problem. And we have to call those things out for what they are. So Senate Bill 7, and HB 6, they're not good for this state. They're not good for a democratic process. I'm proud of people like Councilmember David Robinson, who is standing up, standing with me, standing up. And let me just say this. The right to vote and protecting the right to vote and being against voter suppression should not just be the battle of African Americans or Hispanics. It should be the battle of everyone. And quite frankly, you kind of get tired of every single day and every single legislative session to be fighting back on these type of bills. You kind of get tired. But what keeps you going is that for a person like me, the second African American of 62 mayors in the city of Houston, I didn't get to where I am based on my smartness or who I am. I got to where I am on the backs of others who sacrificed, bled, and died to make it possible for me to be where I am. And now these bills are on our watch. On our watch. And it's incumbent upon all of us, individuals, businesses, faith-based organizations and leaders, community activists, to stand up. Yesterday, with the verdict against Officer Chauvin on the George Floyd murder, was one step in the right direction for accountability. But don't be fooled. HB 6 and Senate Bill 7 will, if passed, implemented, will be steps moving in the wrong direction. And we have to say no. I am not convinced that these bills will just go through the legislative process. I'm not convinced. And I'm certainly not convinced when good folk, good people, stand up to make a difference. And you have to stand up. And this is the defining moment. And we all have a stake in this game. So my hope and my prayer is that these bills will go down, but they won't go down on their own. When we stand up, they go down. And this is time for every single person in the state of Texas to stand up and say no. or we will fall off the cliff following those who are moving in the wrong direction. So this is our moment. This is our time. We are the Harriet Tubmans. You know, this is our opportunity to make a significant difference. So let's get it done, and I remain optimistic that we will. Thank you so very much.
Thank you, Mayor Turner. Up next, we have former Harris County Clerk Chris Hollins.
Good afternoon. We're talking about voting today, and so I would be remiss if I didn't remind you that there are elections taking place right now in Harris County. Early voting has started in our May municipal elections, and it's important that we as citizens cast our ballots and participate and make our voices heard in every election, because of course a presidential election is important. It can move the direction in which our country is headed. But the local decisions that affect our children, that affect our parents, that affect our livelihoods, those take place based on small elections like this that don't get a lot of attention. And so I just want to make clear and encourage everybody, if you have an election that pertains to you right now, make sure you get out and make your voice heard right now. And let me tell you a little bit about some of those elections that are happening right now in Harris County. Guess what? Right now, today in Harris County, in 7 locations, we have drive-through voting. Now, why do we have drive-through voting? Because it's convenient, because it's safe, because the community has demanded it, and frankly, because it's legal. It's worth fact-checking, because in the arguments in the State House and the State Senate, we've heard from Dan Patrick and Brian Hughes and others, oh, this is something, this was an overreach by Harris County that we're simply going to codify properly in the law. That is false. That is absolutely false. When we had drive-through voting in 2020, we were challenged in the courts, and we won. And frankly, we won in front of a federal judge that was a conservative judge appointed by a Republican president. That ruling was affirmed by the conservative Fifth Circuit, right? And so this is not a partisan issue. This is not a right or left issue. This is about democracy, the right to vote, the right to participate. We should value this in the same way that we value the freedom of speech, that we value the freedom of religion, the freedom of the press. We need to protect this as basic American democratic principles. We also have extended hour voting taking place in Harris County on the coming Monday. Why do we have that? Because it's convenient, because it's helpful for folks who are working night shifts, the folks who are working back-to-back in the medical center, the electricians and the welders working at the Port of Houston. This service is for them. And in November of 2020, nearly 15,000 people utilized that service. And we expect a similar proportion of voters to use it this time around because it's helpful for working families, for folks with busy schedules, and for folks who are fighting in unimagined ways as we all have during this pandemic. And guess what? It's legal. There has never once been a legal challenge against 24-hour voting because it's laid out clearly in the law. The law sets a minimum threshold for hours of voting, not a maximum threshold. And so expanding that by investing additional resources from the county to help voters is something that we should applaud, something that we should encourage, not something that we should make illegal. And so when Dan Patrick stands up and says, all these laws that we're passing, they change nothing, that's an idiotic statement, plain and simple. You pass laws, as you know, Mayor Turner, former Representative Turner, you pass laws to change the law. You pass laws to change policy and enact new policy. And the new policy right now that is pushing its way through the State House and the State Senate is voter suppression, trying to make it harder for people to exercise their basic rights. Why are we taking 24-hour voting away? Because 56% of voters in November who used 24-hour voting were people of color, and they know that. Why are we taking drive-through voting away? Because 53% of those voters in 2020 were people of color, and the folks who are pushing these bills are aware of these statistics. And so don't listen to these arguments about voter fraud. There have been no cases of voter fraud reported from November of 2020 in Harris County, bar none. None. This is not factual, and we need to live in a world of facts and reality. And so once you put yourself in this frame of reality, which I know is hard in the times that we live in with so much misinformation, the only possible intent of these laws is to keep people of color and keep young people and keep old people and keep people with disabilities away from exercising their most fundamental constitutional rights in this country. And regardless of where you stand politically, regardless of who you plan to vote for in the future or who you voted for in the past, you should stand for democratic principles. Our business owners should know that to have free enterprise in this country, you must have a free country. And to have a free country, we must have free and fair elections where every citizen has every opportunity to participate. That's what I stand for. For all of our speakers today, I know that's what we stand for. And as Americans, as Texans, that's what we should all stand for. And so I encourage you to do that. Thank you very much. And press, I know you're here today. When you leave here, you should go check out a drive-through voting center that's taking place in Harris County right now with no voter fraud, smooth operations, and short lines, because that's why we have them. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Up next, we have co-founder of Indivisible Houston, Daniel Cohen.
Yeah, that works. Hello? My name is Daniel Cohen. I'm co-founder of Indivisible Houston. We are a group of thousands of democracy advocates, advocates for civil rights, advocates for voting across the city of Houston, stand united with others today in opposition to HB 6 and SB 7, otherwise known as Jim Crow 2.0. People are interested in elections and they are interested in seeing changes, but they want to see changes in the direction of expanding voter access. They want to see changes in the direction of expanding and safeguarding civil liberties and civil rights and the protections of those civil liberties and civil rights. They want to see the kinds of reforms that were implemented in Harris County, such as drive-through voting, expanded voting hours, and the opportunity to cast your vote no matter what your circumstances are. But these election changes are not what those election changes would be. HB 6 and SB 7 are simply an attack on voting. They're an attack on democracy, amidst, as was previously mentioned, a nationwide attack on democracy and civil liberties and civil rights, not just in the voting arena, but in your right to protest, as we see with legislation in Florida, and with all of the different corruption that has taken place within policing and enforcement as well. And people are aware of that. They're conscious of that. They know that this is an attack on voting in black and brown communities. They know that it's an attack on votes for people with disabilities, and they know that it's an attack on votes for people who have 2 and 3 jobs and are looking for an opportunity to get to the polls to make sure that they are counted in the elections. People are entirely aware of that. While the Fifth Circuit was ruling in favor of Harris County and uplifting its measures and its innovations and reforms that it implemented during the election, such as drive-through voting, Houstonians came out to the streets to make sure that they were counted that day. There were actions taking place that day while the court case was going on. And the Houston Chronicle spoke to one of the voters who was out in the streets saying that drive-through voting was really important to her. And one of the things she said was, "I voted for one of the plaintiffs in this case. And if they throw out my vote and make me come back to the polls, I'm going to make sure I don't make that same mistake twice." People are aware of what the extremists in Austin, such as Greg Abbott and Dan Patrick, are trying to do. They are fully aware of what is happening. They are awake to it, and they see it as it is. And that's why they came out to the Greater Houston Partnership Building on Saturday to call for the biggest business voice in the city of Houston and one of the key decision makers and stakeholders in the city of Houston to reject this Jim Crow 2.0. That's why they drive back and forth, not just from Houston to Austin, but from all over the state of Texas to the Texas legislature to make sure to advocate against this bill. That's why they're making their voices heard over things like independent redistricting commissions and going to Austin and pushing for those, because they see what's going on and they see this assault on democracy. No matter what the outcome is, people will continue to push for democracy and continue to stand in solidarity with one another so that our elections are free and fair, and so democracy is vibrant and democracy thrives. So no matter what that outcome is, we're going to make sure that that happens. But we know that HB 6 and SB 7 are indeed a step in the wrong direction. We know that this is an attempt to decrease the amount of polling locations in specific targeted neighborhoods. It was broken by the Washington Post that extremists in our very own area, in very own area of the country, are seeking to recruit provocateurs and operatives from white neighborhoods to go to polling locations and harass and intimidate voters in black and brown neighborhoods. It is very, very clear and has been reported widely in the media. So all of this is in plain sight. But that's not going to stop us from voting, is it? That's not going to stop us from registering voters. That's not going to stop us from canvassing and making sure that people come out. That's not going to stop us from protecting our civil liberties and our civil rights. And at the end of the day, Jim Crow 2.0 won't stand. Democracy will thrive.
Thank you. Up next, we have Delilah Ago-Otto-Haley, co-founder of Vote Simple.
Yes. Thanks. In a state as diverse and as vibrant as ours, we should be talking about expanding and widening access, not restricting and limiting the right to vote. We know the intentions of House Bill 6 are clear: to limit voting hours, prohibit drive-through voting, and inhibit local election officials to send applications to vote by mail to qualifying voters. This is all in backdrop of limiting the availability of hardworking Texans to participate in our democracy. The implementation of these intentions will affect predominantly younger voters and voters of color, the very people our organization, Vote Simple, seeks to uplift. We saw in the last primary election that the last voter in Houston cast his ballot at 2 a.m. at TSU. These bills would reduce the number of polling locations in black and brown neighborhoods, meaning that lines in future elections would only be longer. Voters shouldn't have to wait in line for hours just to make their voice heard and exercise their right to vote. We also know that in arguably the most consequential election in our lifetime, drive-through voting in one of the largest counties offered us a quick, safe, and reliable way to exercise our vote by still taking necessary health and safety precautions. If we can make it work through the height of the pandemic, we surely can make it work as we work to flatten the curve. Since these bills were introduced, voters across the state have expressed their outrage and concern. Just this past weekend, hundreds of voters here in Houston attended a rally to demand the local business community and the Greater Houston Partnership speak out against these voter restriction bills. It's time for our state leaders to listen to the people that they represent. To quote Senator Hughes, if we really want Texans to feel confident that their elections are fair, honest, and open, why make it harder to vote? Voting shouldn't be an obstacle to democracy. Voting should be simple. That's the mandate of our organization. Our state leaders want to make voting hard, and that's unfair, dishonest, and unacceptable. Thank you.
Thank you. And up next, we have student and president of Civic Duty at Rice University, Mason Reese.
Not a problem. Good. Thank you. Okay, hello everyone. So as Imelda said, my name is Mason Reese. I'm a current junior at Rice University. I'm only 20 years old, and I'm also the Civic Duty Rice President and one of the Texas Rising student leaders. And I also happen to serve as the presiding judge on Election Day at the Rice polling location, so I know firsthand what these election reforms implemented last year were really successful for students and how they were able to give us the best work that we're able to put forward as voting. And so lots of other wonderful speakers here have already talked a lot about HB 6 and SB 7, and they've really contributed wonderfully to this discussion and shown how these are clearly voter suppression bills that should be opposed vehemently by everyone in the state of Texas. And today I want to share a little bit about why these bills particularly hurt student voters and youth voters. So it's important first to call these bills what they are. They've been called voter suppression bills today, Jim Crow 2.0. Those are all correct and absolutely should be stated as such. And then Texas ranked 50th in the U.S., dead last in ease of voting in 2020. And now many members of our legislature are trying to make it even harder for Texans to vote and make it even harder for our voices to be heard. And these bills are going to be particularly harmful to youth and to voters of color. And we'll note that youth are the most diverse age group in Harris County and are thus be affected the most by these bills. And I want to emphasize the way that the youth in this area will be really affected. And so youth turned out in 2018 for record turnout, and then we smashed that record again in 2020. And so the fantastic turnout levels in Harris County by young people weren't by accident either. There are many years of organizing that have gone into this effort. So students across all universities and high schools in the Houston area have come together every year for the Houston Youth Voters Conference, now coming into its 4th year, to discuss best practices and get out the vote methods, set goals for turnout and engagement on their respective campuses, and also advocate for polling stations on each of their campuses, something that for the first time this year, there were early voting sites located at UH, TSU, and Rice University, thanks in part to Clerk Hollins. Woo, yeah. So students as well initiated and participated in the mayor's Early Vote College Challenge, which brought together many thousands of students to come out and vote early in a little fun competition to get people out, and included parades across TSU and other events held by the mayor in order to promote voting at each college campus. And so in short, we've seen that when youth do spend the time to organize, we do spend the time to care, we do come out and vote, and we will make sure with our civic engagement and with our growing youth power, when we organize, it will be powerful and it will have an impact. And we've also been really lucky here in Harris County and just sort of in the city of Houston to have an incredibly supportive and responsive government, both from Clerk Hollins and now Isabel Longoria, and also from Mayor Turner. And so we've really made sure that they have put student voices center and made sure to listen to us when it comes to youth voting. And so we know that the state government hasn't really taken the same tact and instead has come out in opposition to our increased turnout and our increased power. These bills will eliminate transportation, really make it difficult for students to come out and vote instead of eliminating transportation barriers via drive-through voting, making it much easier with 24-hour voting for students who work and are in class all day, unable to make it to the polling location in time to come out and cast their ballots. And they've worked in addition to being able to serve the people and the students in each of the ways that works best for them. So we took advantage of these opportunities. We want them to stay. We want them to continue to be able to serve us in the ways that work best for us, and we can and will do everything we can to oppose these bills. So thank you to everyone who has been here today to support us as youth in our elections and our goals in casting our ballots, and hopefully we can prevent voter suppression and Jim Crow 2.0 here at the state legislative level. Thank you.
Thank you. And we are open up for questions now, if we have any questions from the audience or from the media that's here today. I have a mic. I have a mic over here.
Chris, you